I've never had a specific moment where I felt that I'm an adult.
As growing up, I've always had my dad there to help. Any issue, he was there. A nightmare, homework, or even a fall, he'd be there to catch me. But now things are changing and I'm not sure I'm ready for it. When I thought back to a moment where I felt that I'd grown up, I was drawn back to the day that I moved to college. My dad organised most of it for me, and on a cold Sunday morning before my first day, I packed up all my stuff. Before we left, my dad ticked off a list asking me.
Are you sure you haven't forgotten anything?
I rolled my eyes and told him, "Yes, Dad," and we headed off. It still hadn't hit me yet that I was leaving. I tried to ignore the fact that I was truly moving on to the next stage of my life, but I couldn't help wondering if I was ready to be on my own. I turned to my dad and he seemed anxious. He kept tapping his finger on the steering wheel. I was about to ask what was wrong when we arrived at the building. We were about to drive in when we were stopped. In front of us stood a huge gate with a sign saying, "No key, no access." I suddenly panicked and I realised I didn't have a key and I wondered what I had missed. Then I remembered all the emails and letters I had ignored and I realised I forgot to collect it. My dad was frantically calling any number he could find, trying to work out what had happened. I turned to him and explained my mistake, and he began yelling in frustration.
How could you miss this? What are we going to do now?
We both got into the car and sat there in silence, unsure what to do. I felt so disappointed in myself. I couldn't help wondering, how am I going to look after myself when I can't even remember a key? Suddenly I remembered that we drove past a hotel on the way in, and I realised I could stay there and then collect the key in the morning. I told my dad and he seemed relieved. We headed to the hotel, and when we arrived, my dad turned to me and asked,
Do you really want to go to college this year? You could skip it and stay at home with me.
"Home." The words sounded so comforting, but as much as I wanted to agree with him and go home, I looked him in the eye and told him, "I'll be okay." He smiled at me and reluctantly headed back. As I was lying in the bed, I had a moment where I no longer felt like a child. I was alone for the first time in a city I'd never been in, about to start my first day of college.
I realised that everything was changing, and while it was daunting, I finally felt like I was ready for the challenge.